guys, it's your girl CC and I'm back again with another interesting video. I trust you guys are having fun. Thank you so much for clicking to watch this video. So there is a trend going on TikTok. Like TikTokers are sharing their grandmother's love stories. I believe these stories are very interesting because the way people are jumping on this trend, yo, I thought I should bring these videos here so we all can listen to them, like hear their stories. And of course, I'm gonna show you some comments. Obviously, people must have, share their own grandmother's love stories in the comment section, which might be also very interesting to read. Please check these videos out.
And I met him, and he wouldn't leave my father's store for 3 weeks. He camped outside. He would throw rocks through my window with notes that said, "Please go out with me." Grandma, you little victim. What the?
So obviously, this lady right here started this trend. Like she captioned it, "Hearing your grandmother's love stories." Now I have put together few stitches. People started stitching her video, sharing their grandmother's love stories. Let's check the stitches out.
Grandma, you little victim. What the fuck?
Okay, so growing up, I had a Mormor, which is grandma in Sweden. And my grandma didn't speak much English even when we were kids, and she had been here for a long time. So it wasn't until I was a lot older that I found out the true story. So my grandma, Mormor, so Mormor Margaret is what we called her. So Mormor means grandma, and so we called her Mormor Margaret. She, her and her mom and her sister, I'm not sure how that this happened, but they fled Sweden on a ship to Ellis Island to get away from the mean husband and mean brothers. So my grandma's mom left her children, her sons, and got on a boat with her two daughters somehow, some way to come to America. And I have receipts. Hang on just a second. So if you can see in this document, this was in 1929, and then the three uploaded, I'll zoom in, hang on just a second. The three highlighted, Emma was the mom and she was 52. Martha was 20 and she was my grandma's more sister. And Margaret was my grandma and she was 12. So they got on the boat, and I mean, it was a long trek over from Sweden to New York City to Ellis Island. And while they were on the boat, please hold. As you can see here, this document shows the people that were employed on the vessel. So on here, there's a man named Edwin Carlson, and he was 36 years old. So my grandma's mother met this man that worked on this ship apparently over the voyage, and he was like, actually, I could bring you home to, I live in Chicago, Illinois. So they were going to New York, going to Ellis Island, and he was like, I have a home in Chicago, and I work at a steel mill, something along those lines. He was like, I can give you a great life and you can be my house cleaner and your daughters can live there. So fast forward, they move in with him. All is going well. Martha, I think she like goes on and finds somebody and does her own thing. And so Mormor, who is 13 at the time, and her mom Martha live with this man Edwin that worked on the ship. Well, my grandma's mom ends up dying, so Mormor stays with Edwin. And this, actually, I could write a book about this. This is kind of a taboo book, but Mormor, 13, falls in love with now 37-year-old Edwin and gets married. And he was her caretaker and her legal guardian. And they get married and have 3 children. And those are my grandparents. Grandma! My mom always says he was the nicest guy. I guess they had a great life growing up. They had money. Um, she was happy. She lived a very happy life in Chicago. My mom lived a really happy life, and so did her brothers. My mom did talk about sometimes how the one that they left, the grandpa that they left in Sweden, I guess was a very mean man. My mom said Edwin was just a very quiet, very nice man, and she genuinely loved him. So, grandma, Like, blows my mind. Like, how was that okay? He was her legal, like, what a taboo book. Like, this is like a taboo romance book.
And I met him, and he wouldn't leave my father's store for 3 weeks.
One thing my grandma never did was glamorize her marriage to my grandfather. Family might be mad for what I'm about to say. They always mad. My granddaddy was knocking my grandma's head between the washer and dryer on a regular basis. He would have conversations with me. She'd be like, hey, keep an ace in the hole. I feel like even though some grandmas do glamorize how they met and were together like 80 years, there are some grandmas that still tell the truth because they don't want their granddaughters going through what they went through. Then, when these men wonder why women aren't like how they were back then, it's because the women back then were victims. And they told us, those women told us not to be victims, not to settle. And we listen. I do think on the other side of that coin might be like where the pick-me's come in. My grandma was together 80 years up until granddaddy died. And up until granddaddy died, he had a whole nother family. And again, busting that head through the washer and dryer. For 80 years?
Aw, you little victim. What the fuck?
My grandma used to tell us this story about how she met my grandpa and she was just walking home from school one day and this man in his truck was behind her telling her how beautiful she was and he would follow her home every single day. She was 15. He was not in school until she finally said yes to marry him. And my 13-year-old self was like, oh, he knew, and he loved her. But my adult self is like, holy shit, Grandpa, you're a predator. And no wonder why my grandma was such a bitch all the time. I would be too.
And I met him, and he wouldn't leave my father's store for 3 weeks.
My whole family tells the story about how my grandma and grandpa met and how it was the cutest thing ever. And it wasn't until I was an adult when I realized how creepy it was. Essentially, my grandma was 12 or 13 and my grandpa was 18 or 19. And one day my grandma was playing jump rope with her siblings and her friends outside her house. My grandpa used to stand kind of nearby and watch her play because he thought she was so cute. One day he got the guts to walk up to the front door of the house, not my grandma, but to the house, knock on the door, and asked if her parents were home. And her parents had passed away already, so she was being raised by her older brothers. Her brother answered the door, and my grandpa was like, hey, I like that girl out there. I would like to marry her, please. And her brothers, who were having a hard time paying for the mouths to feed and everything, were like, yeah, one less mouth to feed, absolutely, you can have her. And even though my grandparents were together for 50, 60 years, I don't remember, they were together their entire lives. They passed away in their 90s. They were relatively happy together. My grandma used to always say, when your grandpa walked up to me and said, I've asked your brothers and they're okay with me marrying you and I can have you now as my wife, she always used to say, I cried so much. And then eventually, I really fell for your grandpa and I loved him. Like, that's not okay. Who thought this was a cute story?
Grandma, you little victim. What the?
My grandmother was 14 to 15 years old when she got pregnant. My grandfather was around 20, 21, 23, 22. I'm not sure. It bounces back and forth. I have no idea. All I know is she gave birth around the age of 15. She had gone on a petty date with him. Not even like, oh, I want to go on a date with this guy. This guy's asked me out. No, I think it was a double date and her friend wanted her to go on a date with her and this guy's friend, which turned out to be my grandfather. And she ended up pregnant. I'm not sure if they dated a little bit before the pregnancy happened or like right the first date. But my grandmother's mom said, I am not raising a child. I'm not raising another child. Had enough. You're going to go marry that man. My grandmother did not want to marry him. Not one bit. She downright refused, but ended up marrying him anyway, because what was she going to do? She was about 15 years old and ready to pop. He didn't allow her to drive, didn't allow her to have a job. Her job was to cook, clean, and take care of the kids. She had her second son when she was still in her teens. The third son, which was my father, came out when she was in her 20s. And he was an oops, just like the first one. An oops. They stayed together up till my grandmother passed away in 2020. My grandmother didn't know life without a man who treated her horribly. He was abusive. He did drugs. Eventually, he turned to the Lord and thought he was the best thing ever. No, not the Lord, not Jesus. No, himself. He thought he was the best thing ever. Thought that the man was the best thing that ever happened. Towards the end of my grandmother's death, towards when I started sticking up for her, because I was in my 20s, I could see it, I knew what was happening. They were no longer the happy little grandparents that I knew as a child that they would put on when I was around. And I would tell him where to go shove it. He did not like that. He told me I'm going to hell. I told him I would see him there. Sadly, he is still of the living. Why, I do not know. Why are old people like this? Why was this such a normal thing back in that day? These older men going after young teenage girls, or even just, like, the last one I heard was like an 8-year-old. A man in his 30s going after an 8-year-old. That is disgusting.
So I love the question that she asked. Why was it a normal thing for them, you know, marrying at the age of 13, 14, you know?
You little victim. What the fuck?
Okay, so my grandma was 16, about 16 when she met my grandfather, who was in his early 30s. She agreed to marry him because she was at risk of experiencing sexual violence in her own home. She then proceeded to be pregnant for about 9 years straight, got a little break, and then popped out two more, 11 children total. My grandfather wanted 20, so she had to get her tubes tied in secret. My grandfather later had a brawl with the doctor who did the procedure. All my life, my mom didn't reveal a lot about her parents, but about 2 years ago, she was finally able to admit that my grandfather was an adulterer. He had many children out of wedlock, including one that's my age, who was born like shortly before he died. And also the other day she said, well, I guess my dad did beat my mom.
And I met him, and he wouldn't leave my father's store for 3 weeks.
I have this family member that every time he would get up in church and tell the story about how him and his wife met, he would say that he was picking his daughter up from the school bus and he saw this little girl on the bus and he knew that that was his wife. Yeah, the age gap is crazy. But the bad part is nobody in church was like, yeah, grown men lusting after little girls on school buses is wrong. They were like, God really spoke to you. God really showed you. And it took me and my cousins years to realize that's disgusting.
Notes that said, please go out with me. Grandma, you little victim.
When my grandmother married my grandfather, they were in the Philippines. It was World War II. She was multiple months pregnant. She was 14, 15. We never got clarification on that one. About 14, 15. He was 27, an American soldier. The family asked him, like, she's too young, you should wait. At first he was interested in her sister. She said no. I don't know what transpired in between, but my grandmother was the one that ended up marrying this man, more than 10 years her senior, and then was beholden to him the rest of her life. That man, when they after the war, they came back. That man was an alcoholic. He didn't work. She worked. She raised the kids. That man was a menace. But love story. No one cried at Grandpa's funeral except for her. She tried to jump into the grave with him. Catholic stuff, I guess. Grandma. I guess a little victim. She was like 4 foot something.
He wouldn't leave my father's store. For 3 weeks, he camped outside. Grandma, you little victim. What the fuck?
She made a video about how creepy it is, the stories that grandmothers often tell about how they met a person's grandfather, like their love story not being okay. And if you go watch her video, look at all the stitches. I've literally seen like 30 today of people stitching with their own grandmother's story of grooming and assault. Stories like, your grandfather worked for my father. I met him when I was 10 years old, and a mere 3 years later, he asked for my hand in marriage. One woman said her grandfather walked up to the house after seeing her grandmother at like 12, skipping rope in the front yard, knocked on the door, and her brothers answered because her parents had died, and her brothers were raising her now. And he's like, can I have her to marry? And they were like, one less mouth to feed? Yes, take her. So her first conversation with what ended up being her husband was him walking up and being like, they said I can marry you, you're mine now. Or the woman who said her grandfather liked to stand up in church all the time and give testimony about how he would go to the elementary school bus stop to pick up his own daughter and how he saw his future wife sitting on that bus, one of her classmates, and was like, I knew I was going to marry her from the first time I saw her. And the whole church being like, God was speaking to you. But I've been seeing all these, and I can't help but think this is one of the things that MAGA stands for. When they talk about let's make America great again, let's go back to the way it used to be. This is one of the go backs they're talking about. Because they love to say stuff like, my grandparents, my grandmother hadn't been run through. She hadn't slept with 20 men. She was a virgin when she married my grandfather. She was 13. Of course she was. Do you know it wasn't uncommon back then for after the wedding night, the husband to take the bed sheets and hang them out on the line for the neighborhood to see the stain? So he could be like, see, I was the first one to cross home plate. Many of these women who were children at the time groomed and in some cases trafficked by their families. And then generations later, the story has been, polished and turned into like something positive. It's a love story because no one wants to admit that the legacy of their family's origin is something so horrific. So it turns into grandma grew to love him. And, they were supposed to be together. It was meant to be. And despite the odds, despite the age, despite all these other things, they found each other. No. And all these people trying to change things to meet the romanticized fake version of that origin. As if that's really what happened. Going like, oh, my grandparents together, 57 years. You don't see marriages lasting like that anymore. Lasting, she was a baby who was taken by a grown man and then impregnated. She didn't know any different. She had been brainwashed and manipulated. She was financially dependent upon him, and she had a bunch of kids, not to mention, what would people think if you all were to get divorced? All of that kept her there, miserable, for 57 years. Bunch of y'all want to think about Pop-Pop like he's a sweet, loving man, but picture him at like 28 coming up to you, telling you how your 12-year-old daughter looks like she could probably have a lot of good kids for him. And you tell me you don't want to swing a hammer until there's just a chunky puddle.
Grandma, you little victim. What the fuck?
So my grandmother's love story is a little bit different, okay? She got married when she was 14 years old. The guy at the time, it wasn't my grandfather, but he was 28 years old, okay? The marriage lasted for about 6 months, and she ran away and came back home to live with mommy and daddy because she found out that he was cheating on her with another man. Yeah, pretty shocking.
Grandma, you little victim.
So I've seen a lot of these clips, and on the surface, when I compare my grandmother's story to those, in the very beginning, it doesn't look too bad. So my grandmother was legal age. A lot of these girls in these stories are 13, 14, 15. My grandmother was 20. But the thing is, my granddad was 40. And his mother-in-law was 39, so he was a year older than even his mother-in-law, or at least that's the story we were raised with. See, my parents raised us as a Mormon, and one thing that the eldest community is pretty big on is genealogy. And for some reason, I don't know. I don't know if my parents thought that that part wouldn't stick with us or what, but it did, at least in my case. I'm not, huge on it, but, occasionally I like looking and that kind of stuff. And when I went looking, I found out that my granddad was actually 26 years older than my grandmother, and he was 7 years older than her mom. I don't know, 26 sounded worse than 20, 20 sounded okay. I don't know what the cutoff was. But I did also find some info that even my dad may not have known. So apparently grandma was not wife number one. At the minimum, so far, I found that she was wife number 3. Wife number 1, he married when he was 17, and she was 37. So we had a flip of the age group there. He had one child with her, which we were never told about. But my dad definitely knew of her existence because he named one of his children after her. I don't know if he ever met her or anything along those lines. He never told his kids about her, but he did have one older sister. Now, the next wife, I don't know if that was before my grandmother. I believe it is because there's a lot of years in there. But I'm pretty sure it was before my grandmother. It was in Florida. They had 3 children together, and he abandoned them. So he took off, left the kids behind, left her behind, went back home, eventually married my grandmother, had 3 more kids. As far as I know, my dad does not know about those 3 kids in Florida. They know about grandpa. They know that he had other wife, had other kids. The person the oldest, who would have been my brother, my dad's brother, ended up, working as the man of the household and taking care of his siblings, and apparently has very, very strong feelings about my granddad that are not very pleasant that he's passed down to the rest of the children. But so grandpa and his brother were both wandering men. They were both musicians. Grandpa was a yodeling, singing blues cowboy. So he was really popular in California, Mexico, Texas in the 20s and 30s. Friends of Bob Hope, the music, the radio scene, all that kind of stuff for a while before he went back home. But so there's no telling how many other families there are out there. Because like I said, he was 46 when he met my grandmother. He had a lot of travel and a lot of times for friendships under his belt.
Wow. Guys, how do y'all see these stories? Like getting married at the age of 13, 14, 15, 16? Wow. Anyways, I took some screenshots of comments. Like I said, other people shared their stories in the comments. Now, beside me are some of these comments, just few comments I grabbed so you guys can, see what people, dropped in her comment section. Let me know what you all think in the comments about these videos. And if you need a part 2, let me know so I can, bring the stitches here. I don't know. I thought they were gonna share, love stories. Okay, now obviously the ones that we have seen, mm, they really went through hell. I am speechless, okay? I don't know what to say. But if you want to share your story, if you have anything you want to say, like I said, please drop it in the comments. And thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like this video, share, comment, and of course, come back for another video. I'm gonna see you all in my next one. Y'all take care. Bye.